Perfect. So firstly, let me thank everyone for joining. I think it's about 4 minutes into the session, so I think it's a good time to get started. Um, we have an outstanding panel today to discuss everything going on in the agri ecosystem in India. It will be very exciting 45 minutes with the additional 15 minutes at the end for questions as well. Feel free to, throughout the discussion, post any questions you have in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom chat, and we'll get to them towards the end of the chat as well. Let me start by introducing some of the panelists that we have. Starting with, of course, the moderator. We have Ms. Vaidehi Ravindran, who is an investor at Lightrock, based in India, based in Bangalore. Vaidehi joined the Lightrock team in 2016, focused on investment and portfolio management in food, agriculture, consumer supply chain, logistics, and mobility. She's currently on the board of Way Cool Foods, Dunzo, Porter, Vogo, EM3, and Leaf. Prior to joining Lightrock, she was an energy consultant and worked across several stages of development of multi-billion-dollar refining and petrochemical projects in the Americas and in Africa. Previously, Vaidehi was one of the first few women involved in project commissioning and refinery operations at Indian Oil Corporation. Vaidehi has a master's in international affairs from Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs and a bachelor in chemical engineering from the National Institute of Technology in India as well. Second, joining us from Godrej Agrovet, we have Mr. Balram Singh Yadav, who is the Managing Director of Godrej Agrovet Limited, one of India's foremost diversified agribusiness companies. He also serves as the Managing Director for Godrej Tyson Foods, and he has been the Chairman of CLFMA of India twice, which is an association for the livestock industry in India. Balram Sir began his career with Godrej in 1990, and in 2007 took over the reins of Godrej Agrovet as Managing Director. As his first challenge, he successfully led the turnaround of GAVL, which was then a loss-making entity, and put it onto the path towards rapid growth. In 2017, Balram sir was instrumental in taking GAVL public. The public offer received record response and was oversubscribed 96 times. Over the last decade, GAVL top line has grown at 15% CAGR, whereas the profitability grew at 50% CAGR, unlocking significant value for shareholders. Third, we have Mr. Anil Kumar SG, who is the founder and CEO of Samanuti Financial Intermediation Services. Established in November 2014, Samanuti offers financial, co-financial, and non-financial solutions to marginal small and medium holders, including farmers, agri-enterprises, and wholesalers and retailers. Samanuti as a term stands for collective growth, collective prosperity, and collective elevation. And in its journey over the last 5 years, focusing exclusively in agri and allied activities, has its presence in over 54 value chains spread over 19 states in the country. Samanuti works with over 500 farmer producer organizations that are collectively serving about 4 million predominantly small farm holders in Africa, in India, sorry. Anil is a career banker with over 28 years of experience in areas of rural, retail, and agri-banking. He started his career with Canara Bank and joined ICICI Bank later on. Over the last decade, Anil's work has been focusing on creating new institutions across the country and operating in the financially excluded markets with corresponding support structures for the capacity building. Finally, we have Mr. Karthik Jayaraman, CEO and co-founder of Way Cool Foods Private Limited. Karthik sir comes with a diverse experience spanning 2 decades in the fields of engineering, automotive, and management consulting. In the past, he has been associated with leading firms like Ashok Leyland, McKinsey and Company, Tata Motors, and Timken. Karthik entered the corporate world with his first job at Tata Motors and moved as assistant project manager at Timken, followed by McKinsey & Co. as an engagement manager, and finally went on to lead business excellence and dealer development at Ashok Leyland. The company, Way Cool Foods, operates a full-stack broadline product range across multiple channels and categories like fresh produce, staples, and dairy, serving over 4,000 clients on a base of 35,000 plus farmers across the country. With his core expertise in the areas of transforming business processes across operations, sourcing, and supply chain, and leadership capacity building, he's laid the foundation for Way Cool Foods to become one of the fastest growing agri startups in the country today. With that, I hand it over to Vaidehi to lead the rest of the discussion, and best of luck.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thanks, everybody. Good morning to those in India. Good evening to those in the US or other parts of the world. So this is sort of a great session to moderate at this time, and clearly a very esteemed collection of panelists. So I won't take too much time, preluding with anything and get right into it. I think when we talk about Indian agriculture, there's a lot of questions around why, what, why. So we are the second largest agri land, arable land in the world, right? About 150 million hectares. We're the second or third largest producers of most of the grains and potatoes or some fruits and vegetables in the world, and dairy, of course. And on top of that, it as much as for 45% of the Indian population depends on agriculture for livelihood. It's not that they all work on agriculture, but they depend on income from agriculture. But all that said, only 15% of India's GDP comes from agriculture, and we're still quite low on per acre value and yield compared to other countries in the world. So I'm going to just throw it over to Karthik Jayaraman to sort of put a contrast for us between the agriculture ecosystem in India and what it is in the rest of the world, and why are some of these, so to speak, contrasting statistics coming into play, and what can we do to improve it? Over to you, Karthik.
Thanks, Vaidehi. I'll actually build upon what Vaidehi just shared with a few interesting statistics. It's important to understand a few realities of Indian agriculture compared to what one is probably hypothesizing about Indian agriculture. The first piece of information is we are a food surplus nation. This isn't the India of the 1960s where we were dependent upon handouts from developed countries to survive and feed its population. We produce more food than we can consume as a country. Well, like Vaidehi said, we're the second largest producer of fresh produce, second largest producer of staples, the largest dairy producer, and I'm told the largest producer of fish as well in the world. So the problem statement of the 1960s in India used to be, how do I produce enough food to feed my population? That problem statement is shifting, and that's something that all of us need to understand. Where is it shifting? It's shifting to the supply chain. Here again, there is a stark contrast. Here is where the contrast begins between the West and India. If you take a typical Western supply chain, like an American supply chain, you have very short and direct supply chains. We have large farms from where the produce is picked up mechanically, harvested mechanically, processed, shipped through organized logistics, and sold in large hypermarkets. Our supply chain is very different. We have at least 7 steps before the output of a farmer reaches the small retail shop from where we buy our food. And sometimes it goes as high as 11 steps. Now, why is it so? If we look at some statistics that will explain why there is such a stark contrast. The American food industry comprises 2 million farms, and the average size of a farm is 440 acres. We have 118 million farms, and each farm has about 2.5 acres on average. A 2.5 acre farm produces, maybe 1 ton of pulses, or 1.5 tons of rice, or maybe 600 kgs of tomatoes. You need a number of aggregators to collect all this output from little farms and consolidate it to an economic transport unit, which is a large truck that can carry 30 tons. So there is fragmentation at the source, which is very different from the West, and that requires aggregators. On the other end, you have the way we consume is also very different. The US has about 19,000 settlements, and the US buys its groceries from about 38,500 grocery stores and supermarkets, and you have about 155,000 convenience stores. India has 674,000 settlements approximately, and we buy our food from as many as 12 million grocery stores. In fact, nobody knows the exact number of grocery stores that is there here. India buys its food daily, it buys it fresh, and it buys it by walking down to the neighboring grocery store. That means you have several layers of disaggregation. A 30-ton truck arrives into the market, you've got to split it to a point where you can deliver 30 kilograms of potato into a shop. And that means you have 3 or 4 layers. And that is why you have 7 layers. Now, what's the problem with having 7 layers? We read a lot about food loss and food wastage. Food loss is defined as what happens between the farm and the supermarket. Food wastage is what happens at and after the supermarket. The sum total of food loss and food wastage by various estimates is the same 45%, whether it is in the US or in India. But the contrast is very stark. In the US, 10% or lower is lost between the farm gate and the supermarket. 35% gets wasted at the supermarket shelf or in our homes. In India, 30 to 35% is lost between the farm gate and the supermarket. It simply vaporizes or is consumed by pests or is consumed by rodents, and only 10% is wasted. We don't waste our food at all in India. We find a way to save the food, and we consume fresh every day for a reason. But we are giving away as much food as what Brazil consumes in just losses before it reaches the supermarket. And that, we believe, is the focus of New India. The entire focus, whether it is the public sector or the private sector or the farmer sector, has shifted to improving the efficiency of the food supply chain. Imagine if we save all that food, the 35% that is lost, how much more nutrition can reach the population, not just of India, but worldwide. We can be the breadbasket to the world. And that's where the focus of policy as well as the private sector is shifting as we speak. Over to you, Vaidehi. Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik. That was super useful and super interesting. And as we can all see, right, there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of fundamental systemic transformation to be made in the Indian agri ecosystem. And what do you know? There are a lot of people trying to do it, right? There's a very vibrant ag tech startup ecosystem, and I think it's probably no longer just a startup ecosystem, right? Like folks like Karthik and Anil have been around more than 5 years now, so it's no longer really a startup ecosystem, but let's call it the new generation of business ecosystems that are actually interacting extremely well with the existing ones, like Mr. Balaram's business, right? So I think there is a fundamental shift in the way how the agri ecosystem from a corporate or the business side is working, where they're looking at farmers as entrepreneurs to partner with and work with. Or there are farmer collectives, there are there are small companies, there's companies doing financing, the companies looking at technology. There's just a complete fabric of new ecosystem builders that have come into the fore in the last 5 to 6 years. So Anil, would be lovely to understand this as you see it. So from your perspective, as you have been one of the bigger financing arms in the supply chain piece, and therefore have pretty much come across with every stakeholder and every new company to every existing company that's played in the space. So over to you, Anil.
Thank you, Vaidehi, and it's wonderful to be on the panel and with wonderful people. And greetings to everyone. When you said, Vaidehi, that both Karthik and myself have been around for 5 years, it suddenly feels so long. Because not long ago, 2014, when Samunati started its journey, and when we said we want to focus lending to agriculture, it was looked upon like a crazy idea. And most of the lenders in agriculture thought I have gone nuts. And it was difficult for them. It took 4 months for me to explain that agriculture and crop loan are two different things. There is a lot that happens before the seed is sown and a lot that happens after the harvest. And most of the people in the financing world equated agriculture to crop loan and had their own apprehensions in terms of why reaching out to a farmer is so risky, so on and so forth. But thankfully now what we see is such a vibrant segment in just 5 years, And I would say this vibrancy we are witnessing in the last 3 years, where there is a lot that has changed, and it is not sporadic, it is not in pockets. You have youngsters getting into the ecosystem, they finding incubators is not difficult, and incubators are there both from the government side as well as private incubators. Angel funding and seed fund and first check, you are pioneers in many of those, is not difficult. Finding resources is not difficult. Finding acceptance that somebody is looking at pursuing entrepreneurship in agriculture is not a crazy idea anymore. So you are seeing entire ecosystem bubbling with activity in just last 3-4 years. And these collaborations are paving way for many new things to happen. For example, take the collaboration between Vekul and Samunati. It started about almost 5 years, I would suppose. Both were small entities. Both of us had no clue where we are going, but we knew that directionally we are aligned, and we thought we can support each other. Karthik coming in with his wonderful understanding of supply chain, we bringing in the debit credit dimension, and how do you collaborate and work together. So when does collaboration happen? While preparing for this session, I was just wondering, why are we collaborating? When does collaboration happen? When do people consider competitor analysis and compete? Collaboration happens when there is abundance. Competition happens when there is scarcity. And the potential opportunity that agri in India at this point in time is abundant in its potential, in its opportunity, and its promise to give opportunities to everyone, which is what Americas were all about when the continent started way back, 18th, 17th century, 18th century. So there is a lot that is happening. And as a young company, Sammunati started working with startups way back, as I mentioned, and 15th of August, we launched a platform called Samaram to make engaging with startups much more tech-enabled, much more formal. Prior to Samaram, we had worked with about 35 startups, including Waycool, and we had put about 100 crores of our capital to that in terms of debt and market linkages. But since the launch of the platform, what we are witnessing is a phenomenal rise in number of startups which are looking at working with Sammunati, and we have about 220 active, genuine registrations on this platform. In other words, of the 600 and odd active startups in the agri ecosystem, 1/3 of them are keen to work. And there are 3 categories that we open in Samaram. One, do you need customized working capital? While getting equity is easy, getting first check is easy, angel funding is easy, and getting bank funding is a little far away in their life cycle, there is a requirement to get working capital. Number 2 is mentoring services. And again, there are so many opportunities to get mentoring support. The verdict was very clear that people don't need advice anymore. So just less than 10% of them opted for mentoring support because they said, we have enough of it, don't give any more. The third dimension of the request that came in on Samaram platform is access to the smallholder farmer through the farmer producer organizations, through the collectives, which represents for me an idea that has proof of concept and is actually looking at distribution. So about 50% of the entities are looking at riding Sammunati's distribution channel to be able to give or offer their product, service, or technology. What all this leads to, Vaidehi, is the environment, the opportunity in the agri ecosystem in India is akin to what Silicon Valley was in the during the .com boom. And I would say any entrepreneur who is looking at even at the fringes of making a decision, this is the time to jump. There is so much that can be done, and there is so much that is possible. And the numbers talk for themselves.
Yeah.
Anything less than $1 billion is a rounding of error in India. So on that note, I hand it over back to you.
Thank you, Anil. And I think the experience that entrepreneurs like you and Karthik have gone through over the last 5 years to almost build up this ecosystem, right? It's vibrant now, and the quality of talent at every level coming into the agri ecosystem has tremendously increased. It is no longer so working in agri. I remember when I just moved back to India was almost considered like you're taking up a not-for-profit job, right? It didn't look like you were building an enterprise. People looked at you as if you were giving up a better economic incentive opportunity, but the talent's moving here, and that very much sort of indicates to the point that you made around how it's becoming more Silicon Valley like. And I'd like to go back to the point a little bit you made around collaboration and talking about FPOs, right? And again, the point that Karthik made around there being 100 million farmers, over 100 million farmers in India, right? And which means every solution to be offered, right, it becomes the cost of distribution starts to get high. And what we need here a lot for the longest time, people were advocating consolidation in agriculture, right? Consolidation is the way where investments have gone into agriculture in the West or in developed markets. But in India, we look at collectivization versus consolidation, because we still have 100 million entrepreneurs. We look at how we work with 100 million entrepreneurs at the same time, and how we look at collectivization in every part of the value chain, be it giving them inputs or being buying from them or giving them finance for whatever purpose, right? And one of the industries that has actually kind of done this well, right from a industry ecosystem to regulatory ecosystem, is poultry, right? And I'd like to sort of get your views, Balram sir, on how you guys have seen this, especially given you've been a leading player in the sector, as to how collectivization has helped transform the sector, and how we can see some of the similar transformative changes in the broader agri sector as well.
So thank you, Vaidehi. Good morning to everybody in India, and good evening wherever. I will make a case for animal agriculture, not just for poultry. And I will also tell you with data what has worked and what has not worked, which also paves the way for what is required in different other sectors of agri. If you really ask me, one of the reasons why this sector has prospered is because animal agriculture till about early 2000 for the government of India and state government was milk. And this conscious ignoring of fish, shrimp, and poultry is the reason why poultry has prospered so much. And let me just tell you that what is the future and how slowly it is crawling. I've got data from 2013 to 14. The growth in crop agriculture has been about 0.5, 0.6% in GDP, whereas most of the agri GDP growth has come from animal agriculture, which has grown at about 10.8%. And Karthik said that we have become the largest producer of milk, largest producer of eggs, etc. And let me tell you how this sector has performed. From 2000 to 2019, for a decade, population grew 29%, food grain 51%, fruits 130%, milk and fish over 150%, eggs over 200%, chicken 400%. And one of the reasons why it has happened is, and which is the big thing which probably startups and everybody has to address, that why animal agriculture could do well, just because of one reason. Because the value chains integrated, because there was an assured offtake at fair prices. There was a mechanism where price discovery was transparent. It was driven by different players. In milk, it was driven by cooperatives. In shrimp, it was driven by exporters who created a supply chain which is globally competitive, with traceability, quality, everything taken care of. And poultry is one of the great shining examples, because nobody bothered about it. It grew so much because the initiative was taken by integrators. And the best part of poultry was that in other animal agriculture, the price risk was still with the farmers. The integrators in poultry took the price risk. So farmers were given a growing charge, and the price risk came to integrators, and then we saw explosive growth. The greatest part of this sector, very little regulation. We are out of APMC, we get very little support, but for dairy, because governments are obsessed with dairy. And I'm saying that the buyers of these products have created so much of efficiency as we go back. Shining example is Sugna of Tamil Nadu. Now, anywhere in the world, whoever knows Tamil Nadu, if I tell them Tamil Nadu has the highest consumption of chicken in the country per capita, people are really surprised, because everybody feels that Tamil Nadu is vegetarian. But that has happened because real prices of chicken have grown at about 1.5% in Tamil Nadu in last 20 years. Chicken has become the cheapest meat in the country. And let me also tell you that if people ask anybody, any crop, there are so many experts here, that which is the segment which can double in next 5-7 years, everybody will point to poultry, because that is where most of this, because we are not a swine eating population, we will never eat beef. Milk is already reaching its plateau, and there is a limit to which it can grow. Most of the growth will come from fish and poultry. So I think that is where the focus is, and the key requirements here is assured buyer, less regulation, less participation of government. And the best part is that if you take poultry and fish and shrimp, the startup ecosystem has not even started. There are so many problems in value chain which can be sorted by a lot of these startups which will happen, who are still obsessed by, say, fruits and vegetables. So, and government, of course, after avoiding it for some time in last 2-3 years, have realized that the way this value per acre will double or triple and the farmer income will double is because of animal agriculture. Because in animal agriculture, you can have cash flows every 15 days, every week, every month. You don't have to wait. The farmer doesn't have to wait to be paid twice a year. So this is the beauty of this sector. Confirmed offtake, assured a price and fair price mechanism, least regulation. We can transport milk anywhere in the country if we have cold chain, chicken anywhere in the country. 60% of eggs of this country are produced by 4 states and they're feeding 30 states because free movement of these products are there. So this is what freedom can do, and this is what, and the best part is that people talk about we did not have we have had a different kind of consolidation. Earlier, 20,000 or say $3 billion of chicken was produced by 100,000 farmers. Today, $12 billion of chicken is produced by 20,000 farmers. The farm size are becoming bigger. The scale is there. Their negotiating power with us has increased. Everywhere we have dairy farmers association, poultry farmers association, shrimp farmers association, and there is a very good balance which is maintained because of the processors are organized, the farmers are organized, and the ecosystem is working very well.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think that provides a good crystal ball into how the rest of agriculture can follow, right, in India. And just to put things in perspective, and this has been a great discussion of what's happening and what could be, right? And just in 1965, just about 50 years back, when Paul Ehrlich wrote Population Bomb, he said India will have trouble feeding itself, right? And then came the Green Revolution, and then came a whole bunch of efforts and policies and so on that kind of shifted us from being a nation surviving for feeding its own mouths. And the policy at that point of time was focused around how do we feed people, how do we give them basic carbohydrate nutrition, forget about what's the next step, and how do we make sure that the farmers are not exploited, how do we keep them a protected class. But that was 1960s and 70s, but that's starting to shift because it needs to shift, right? It's starting to shift towards basically saying, how do we make agriculture a wealth creation sector, right? Wealth creation has never been associated with agriculture for the longest time, but we're seeing that move happening. And we're also seeing consumption to like nutrition to all of that shifting far away from just carbohydrates to other form of nutrients. We're starting to see increase in horticulture replacing just grains, increase in poultry and dairy and so on. So a full-fledged nutrition, right? Nutrient content over and above carbohydrates. And the last shift that we're seeing is how do we fund, and this is a very sociological point, and we should remember this, right? This is a large vote bank community to the country, right? 100 million farmers and about 45% of the population depends on it for livelihood, right? And there to the government or the policy ecosystem or everybody has stopped treating the farmer as a protected class, but giving them the respect to be treated as entrepreneurs. If you are an entrepreneur who wants to create wealth out of the land that you hold by farming, how does the ecosystem come together to help you as an entrepreneur versus treating you as a protected class by putting barriers around what you could do? So that fundamental shift is what we've seen happening. And that is what in some ways Mr. Balram described has happened and opened up the poultry sector, right? And why all of this, right? Why all of this? Because what we can do is we increase fundamentally wealth creation from the farm increases needs to happen because you need to increase value per acre. You need to add technology. You need to think through how we enable financing, how we enable access to the newest ways of farming to 100 million farmers. So all of that requires a certain liberation from thinking of farmers as a protected class. And that is the shift that we're seeing. As you guys, I can see a lot of questions coming from that policy, and that's what's quite hot in India. Let me preface it by saying these are changes that have already happened and the laws are just writing them down. So there is not, these laws are not triggering some systemic change that's going to take Indian agriculture in a bad course. Let me put that in perspective and then open it up again, to the group of individuals here, I'd probably, like Kartik, if you want to start off, we go in the same order, and to add your views on where you think sort of the farm laws fit into the agri ecosystem, or fit into this fundamental transformation of the agri ecosystem in India.
I think, Vaidehi, you phrased it perfectly accurately when you said that in many parts of the country, or in large parts of the country, the farm laws are merely endorsing what's already happening on the ground. So, there's a framing of, large mandis being the primary hub where transactions happen for farmers, and that this ecosystem is under threat because of the farm laws. But in reality, in the past 20 years, most states have done significant parts of these reforms already. In some sense, some of these farm laws are just a consolidation of what's already happened. And the evidence is pretty clear that it has helped the farmers. Mr. Yadav was touching upon Tamil Nadu as an example where APMC did not exist. It was largely a private market. And the farmers in Tamil Nadu are a fairly entrepreneurial set of people who have blended the best of grain cultivation, horticulture, poultry, and dairy to generate significant value per acre. And that's the big shift that's happening, right? From yield per acre to value per acre. And the farmers know how to rotate crops and therefore enrich and regenerate their soil and not torture it to death, which is happening in areas where people are not rotating their crops. The farmers have come up with smarter solutions to manage their water tables, and we are seeing evidence of that. The evidence of that is there in Maharashtra as well, where certain segments of horticulture have a different set of integrated supply chains that are already developed. So what you're saying is absolutely correct. Firstly, this is a continuity in reforms that's happening, which are already happening in the country. And secondly, the evidence clearly points that they have helped in the states that have gone further with these reforms than the other areas. The third point is what Mr. Yadav already emphasized. Other segments have already done this. Dairy, poultry are classic examples of sectors that in a way started by default with these reforms in place, and they are obviously working extremely well for both stakeholders, for the value chain integrators as well as the producers. So the evidence is there. We expect that this will continue in some form or the other, and we endorse it.
Right. Sorry, Vaidehi, you are on.
Vaidehi, you are mute.
Anyhow, I could
Go ahead.
that.
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, in addition to what Balram sir and Karthik mentioned, one of the dimensions that we are also witnessing in the Indian landscape in relation to what is being produced is the consumer behavior and the awareness about what we are eating, what we are consuming, and how is it being grown, and so on and so forth. A lot of people now are more keen, if not switch, on what is being consumed by them. How are they being produced, and is there a dimension of their health which is their priority to what they are consuming. 10 years ago we never thought of organic. 5 years ago we never thought we would pay a little more for organically grown. Now last 2-3 years people don't mind paying a little premium to safeguard their health. And of course, the pandemic only added the need to grow what is good for us. A lot of consumer behavior that we are looking at from the consumption perspective will and is having a cascading impact on the agriculture and eventually to the smallholder farmer. A lot of agtech innovations are also coming around the fringes of this change in consumer behavior. Traceability of food, the direct procurement from the farmers, the organically labeled dedicated shops and chains that are coming up only organic. Other than 24 Mantra, we did not see anything organic for a long time. But now you see there are at least 24 brands. That's why maybe 24 Mantra came in, at least 24 brands and dedicated stores, and people going more as a preference rather than choosing between organic and inorganic. And there are also a lot of things that are happening in the peripheries of large urban areas, right? Vertical farming is also becoming a fad. Hydroponics are becoming in vogue. So there is a lot of consumer behavior that is also driving a lot of innovation. The other dimension is the use of technology in agtech ecosystem or startups in agriculture, whether it is giving advisory services or whether it is getting in the supply chain of inputs. There is a lot that is happening in this space. So as Karthik mentioned, the new legislations are one part of what is already happening, or one part of how to enhance what is happening. But the ecosystem is so diverse and so vibrant that many more things are already in the offing.
Balram sir, your views.
Yeah. So let me entertain you first. So I was very amused when you pointed out to that 1965 paper that India will suffer. And I think more recently, 1 year ago, everybody wrote that India will have billions of deaths because of COVID, because the West does not understand us at all. We are a nation of entrepreneurs, of self-made people. We can adapt to any situation. And in COVID, where the West is and where we are, everybody can see what we have done. So point is, if you want to put India in a framework, please never do that. We will surprise you on the positive side every time. So don't predict anything about us. We know how to manage our things. We are very smart people. Even if they're uneducated, they're smart because they've been entrepreneurs for thousands of years. So that's point number one. So point number two, I would say, is you all have talked about value chains. And let me just tell you that we are not the people. I would say that, let me just be rephrase. Our biggest problem in this country is that government is standing between us and prosperity everywhere. Wherever they step aside and become a facilitator instead of a controller, suddenly that sector explodes. And it need not be based on domestic consumption. For example, shrimp. Shrimp is one crop you cannot imagine. 99% of shrimp we are producing inland is exported. It is not a crop for domestic market. Everybody feels that 135 crore people, we have such a big domestic market which will give us export competitive edge. No, we have developed this industry just because of enterprise, just because government was just a facilitator. They were not controlling anything. And today we are the largest exporter of shrimp. The other thing people just don't understand how we are. We are a country where cow is supposed to be sacred. Most controversial thing to talk about is cow slaughter. We are the largest exporter of beef. The reason is that we have buffaloes, which no other country has. And point is that why dairy is prospers, because buffalo has a residual value. So when farmer, not in mathematics, puts a calculation, in his mind, IRR or buffalo is very high because there is a residual value at 5-6 years later. So I'm saying that animal agriculture is a shining example. Again, I say just step aside and let things happen. Farmers are capable of organizing themselves. Gone are the days when they could be exploited. There is so much of information available. They have access to knowledge. They have access to politics. They have access to power. And another thing, through you, I want to tell this country is very dynamic. It is changing with technology. In 1 year, the way agri sector has changed because of COVID, the farmers have also become so tech savvy. There have been meetings on Zoom with farmers, etc. So everything is changing. Whenever we make laws in this country, we should put a expiry date for those laws now. That 10 years later, this law will be, otherwise it will continue. So that law should become redundant and disappear from the constitution in 5, 10, 15 years, because this country would have changed and we may not need that law. APMC was a requirement at some point in time. It is not a requirement anymore. So the laws should have an expiry date, just like medicine. They should be out of the constitution at a particular point in time, or should be modified, reacted, amended, or just given up. So my thing is that it is the government which is standing between us and prosperity for our farmers, in the garb of trying to protect them.
Thank you. And I think we've kind of covered the farm laws and their relevance again in the journey of the Indian agriculture ecosystem and its transformation quite extensively. And quite literally, this is all there is to know about it, right? It's not like we're missing something that we need to angst about. Just putting that out there. And just to sort of pause here and potentially go over to questions, if that's okay. I can see that there's a lot of there are a lot of questions that have come in. Some, again, the panelists have tried to answer offline as well. But let me kick this off with, I think there was one question on, if I'm not wrong. Hold on. Yes, there's one question on water intensive farming, and I find that very interesting because there is a very resource sustainability view to it. Because end of the day, agriculture, whatever it is a resource profession. Except the only difference between agri as a resource and my previous industry, oil as a resource, is agri as a resource is renewable. That said, there is a limitation to that resource as well, and water is actually one of the first commodities or first resource that comes into play. So the question here is, can the panel provide their insights on water-intensive nature of the crops grown in India and the detrimental impacts on the water table? We've increasingly become dependent on export of water-intensive crops while we import crops requiring less water. Does this imperil India's water security? How can policy provide nudges to farmers and businesses to promote less water intensive crops? So Balram sir, would you like to start this off? Because again, you've seen this over much longer time, and again,
Yeah.
exporting water has been a pretty important question.
Yeah. So I'll give you a political and a realistic answer. So the political answer is that whichever resource you want to use judiciously, it should be priced. And one of the biggest problem of the country is that the water is not priced; it is freely available. Having said that, I strongly feel that we will never be able to regulate which crop the farmers should grow, which they should not grow, depending on water availability. That will happen automatically when farmers see scarcity, etc. They will automatically shift. Having said that, I think the focus of this country in the next 10, 15, 20 years is to focus on micro irrigation. It is to focus on ability to gather as much water as possible at the time of monsoon, do water harvesting. Those kind of technologies are more important before asking farmers to stop using those and stop growing this, because it will create their own problems. So managing water rather than conserving water should be the first idea. I think it is a journey we will take. Micro irrigation is awesome. We have seen 70-80% reduction in water use wherever micro irrigation is there. Most of the states are giving subsidy. We are in oil palm plantation business, which is a water hungry crop actually. 300 liters of water per day per tree. The issue is that as soon as you have a drip irrigation or micro irrigation capability in that, suddenly it drops to 30 liters. So managing water is more important. That's what I feel initially. I'm very sure that 10, 15 years later, that is why I'm saying that this managing water will not be important 10, 15 years later. Then we will have to probably, in case we open the markets, automatically shifts will happen, that we will go for less water intensive crops. We may import something where water is in abundance. We export things where water is scarce. So I'm saying that balance will take 15, 20 years, but that kind of intervention will be premature at this time and create another political storm.
Yeah, rightly said. Karthik, I think some of the work that we've done with in Wakecool with outgrow farmers and things like that has also provided us a little bit of an insight on how to work through this. Do you want to add a few points here?
Definitely, Vaidhi. I think while power to suck water out is free and therefore water technically is not charged, it's not easy. We've seen in belts where the power availability and power quality is so poor that farmers anyway don't want to run deep bore wells. And there's now a shift that's starting to happen. That they're asking questions saying, can we get out of this painful situation? So we work with a network of farmers where we cross-pollinate their ideas on water harvesting. And we have actually seen evidence of water table rising in many geographies in and around Bangalore, for example, because of the efforts that these farmers have taken, with some help from us in terms of cross-pollination of the ideas. So there are fields that are being laid out where inherently the water that is caught in the fields, the catchment, is fed back into the farm pond. And the farm pond in turn builds up the water table. And we've seen such cycles operating, and there is evidence in terms of improvement in water table. The second is what Mr. Yadav said. There are multiple systems. We have rain guns, we have drip systems, we have controlled fertigation systems. We now are, in fact, experimenting with a couple of farmers on autonomous fertigation systems, which actually figures out the weather condition and doses exactly what's required to target the irrigation and target the use of water much more than what's been done in the past. And the third is, market forces themselves can dictate what crops the farmers plant and how it works. Since horticulture is less regulated, we're seeing a lot of this happen where farmers naturally go for crops that are firstly regenerative to the soil, nitrogen fixation with pulses, for example, and they also result in effectively lower average water utilization. If you're rotating your crop between pulses and say paddy, then automatically rather than 2 cycles of paddy, if you're doing one of this, then your water consumption comes down. And there are many such ideas that we are seeing that, of course, a lot of our institutions have already been guiding the farmers on. We simply act as channels that propagate these ideas further and help effectively reduce water intensity.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that is super useful. So I'm just going to go through the next few questions, right? Is there any difference between good subsidies and bad subsidies in terms of long-term impact? What kind of support programs and have a long-term positive impact, and which ones are detrimental? So I'm just going to take like 30 seconds here before turning it over to one of the panelists here. Every time you think about a subsidy that's provided to a farmer, think about, does it solve for his income this season, or does it solve for his capability building overall? And if it does one at the expense of the other, it's a bad subsidy. That's the thumb rule in my head, right? If it does one without damaging the two, it's okay. If it doesn't do one or two, it's just a useless subsidy anyways, right? Does it put money in his pocket this season? And does it improve his capability over several seasons? And by putting money in its pocket, does it take away the capability? The one that has not been good for farmers at all, and Anil can chime in on this, is the pardoning of loans, right? Pardoning of loans has completely made a mess out of the lending for agriculture, because you can never figure out the right level of risk, because the risk to reward ratio in agri lending is just skewed all over the place. And that's because of some of these subsidies and all of that, which has actually impacted long-term capability of the farm's ability to build. So Anil, you want to sort of add more on that dimension as I asked the other panelists as well?
No, it's a tricky subject. All that I would want to add to what you have said, Vaidehi, is as long as the intended beneficiary, which is the smallholder farmer, is kept as the intended beneficiary in real terms, then a lot of sense would make to which of the categories of subsidies would make relevance to whom. I'll just add 2 examples to this. One, you provide a lot of subsidy to bring the machinery and other things in the hands of the farmer, but the farmer does not have access to power. Right? So the machinery is there, but you are not able to run. So ideally, it should have been, okay, I'm giving you a capability, but can I also give you the capability to run it? Right? Is in one dimension. The second dimension is the farm loan waivers that you have mentioned, Vaidehi. What the farmer wants actually is additional liquidity for next crop.
Correct.
Not a pardoning of a liability that he has or she has, where there is no capability to repay in any case. All that you are basically saying is, okay, somebody will not be after you to repay the money. But what do I do today? What do I do for the next season? So instead of the rear view mirror, or instead of the past, can the same allocation be provided saying, hey, we know you have a liability, we will pause on it. Here is the additional liquidity for you for the next crop. Then there is a possibility of your second category where they may earn a little for the previous crop as well, if you are able to support the liquidity. So bring the smallholder farmer in focus, put yourselves in their shoes and say what is good for them and do it. Then it naturally becomes a good subsidy. That's
yeah.
it.
No, that's important, right? And Balaram sir or Karthik, would you guys want to add anything to this?
So I would say that according to me, and I've worked in this sector for 31 years and traveled deep into India and seen poverty myself, I must say there are no good subsidies or bad subsidies. The, the, the problem is continuing with the same solution, subsidies for perpetuity, and not withdrawing them. I'm saying I classify subsidies in two parts, one which go into P&L of the farmer and one which go into balance sheet of the farmer. So P&L of the farmer is gone in the same year itself, and that has no value. But sometimes that is needed to bring people out of poverty, give support to the farmers. And that 6,000 rupees per acre, which should go to poor farmers, is a good subsidy in that case, but should not be continued forever. What is a good subsidy? I would say micro irrigation subsidy is a good subsidy. Kisan credit card interest subvention is a good subsidy. I think these are the things which Kisan credit card, as Mr. Anil said and Mr. Karthik also pointed out, is that you need working capital and you need capital. And innumerable studies have said that 30-40% of what farmer gets goes back into his land in creating capacity and capability, because that is his source of livelihood. He's an entrepreneur. And the best thing government has done through Kisan credit card is that they had to break that cycle of money lender or the Aratiya once, which is a great opportunity because of that. I think one of the things which is most important is that this government has done is, apart from farm laws, they have brought a lot of other things to support that. The FPO, the Agri Infrastructure Fund, in case we have to have a parallel capability to market the produce, we need some infrastructure. And for that, they got this fund. The other thing was this Kisan credit card, these loans at very, very low rates. I think one of the reasons why people want to go to Aratiya is it because of that financial resource. I think these are the things which have to be done, but put an expiry date to everything. You cannot continue that for perpetuity. Micro irrigation subsidy, how it works, you have to see potato farming in Gujarat. Revolutionized. When I was a student of agriculture, per hectare yield has become per acre yield in Gujarat in potato, because potato is water. Just give it every day, drop by drop.
Thank you. And I think we have 4 minutes, and I kind of want to end on a quest. I know there are a lot of questions, and I know we're running short of time, but I kind of want to end on a question that has a crystal ball wish fulfillment character to it. Where do you see today's average Indian small farmer in 2035? Karthik, you want to kick this off?
I think the small Indian farmer will become an entrepreneur who builds economies of scope rather than that of scale. They will be multitasking and producing multiple outputs from the same farm, maybe through intercropping, maybe through animal husbandry, through poultry, and any other levers that they can find. They will be intelligent users of their land and will be much more advanced in the practice of regenerative agriculture. We were already advanced, we're relearning it, and we will get back to where we were as a country. And most importantly, I believe that the risk profile would be considerably different for a farmer then. The risks that a farmer faces today, the farmer is the foremost entrepreneur in the country. They take much more risk than any of us do sitting in our offices. And I believe the mechanisms that are being put in place will substantially reduce these risks. And therefore, I am very, very bullish. We will not see collectivization, consolidation, etc. to that extent, but we will see economies of scope. And like Vaidehi, you pointed out rightly, this will be more value per acre rather than more yield per acre. I think that's the direction the farmer will go. So Vaidehi, you're on mute.
Sorry, Anil or Balram sir, can you please add? I think I like this crystal ball nature because it gives us the view to like look 20 years later or 15 years later as it stands today.
I would just make one point here, because it is crystal gazing. Rather than buying everything in retail and selling wholesale, if we can make the smallholder farmer buy in wholesale through FPOs and sell retail to you and me, then that would be fantastic.
In addition to what Mr. Karthik, as Mr. Anil has said, I think all that will happen. But I have a feeling that solution to Indian agriculture is in manufacturing and service. We have to pull out 100, 200 million people out of farming because the land cannot take load of this population growth in the rural India. Today we have 45%, imagine 45% of 1.6 billion people or 1.55 billion people. So the other sectors have to grow much faster and pull out people. And if we are able to reduce this percentage of population in rural India coming down year after year, definitely all this, what Mr. Karthik and Mr. Anil has said, will happen. And I am very sure that starting point is going to be 2021, when freedom for Indian agriculture will start through these reforms.
Great. Thanks again, everybody. We're sort of in the last minute of our session, but this has been a great conversation. And for those of us, the panelists in India, it's been a wonderful way to kick off a Sunday. And I hope you guys have a really good rest of the session. And Sanjay, over to you to close this off.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. This was
We'll have it together.
We'll start this off. Again, thank you for joining at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. I know for me that is quite early, but I really appreciate you all taking the time and taking the effort. Thank you to everyone who joined. We had a significant number of people joining this panel today from India, USA, around the world, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time. I'm hoping it was as useful and enlightening for you as it was for me as well. The 2 points that I really appreciate and I'll definitely be taking away from this. The first is that the future of Indian agriculture will be focusing on increasing value per acre versus yield per acre. That is a fundamental mindset shift, especially compared to Western, more developed countries, where they're focused on more and more quantity coming off the same farm, of the same SKU, which also leads me to my second point that I think Karthik sir mentioned about how farmers in the future will be focusing on economies of scope rather than economies of scale, because if we look at centuries ago, farmers were never single croppers. They had cows, they had chickens, they had other things on the farm as well. It's only a fairly recent shift where farmers have gone to a single SKU and completely destroyed any diversification potential. So I think just to wrap up, I'm very excited about the future of Indian agriculture as well, and I appreciate you all taking the time. For all of the people still like listening in, I encourage you to jump onto the next panels starting shortly as well. Apologies for not being able to get to everybody's questions, but hopefully we'll be able to get this panel together again for many more talks in the future. I think we're just sharing the list of talks now, but again, thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.